Well, good morning. This is Hot Rod Bob, and you've got gas. The morning edition, the Great American Auto Scene, presented by Irwindale Speedway, Irwindale Drag Strip, and Valley Head Service here in the San Fernando Valley. How you doing this morning? It's a Taco Tuesday. I'm going to probably go get some tacos for lunch today. It's a great day for Taco Tuesday. Boy, and it's a beautiful day here in Oxnard, California. Sun is shining. Weather is beautiful. Hi, Kenny Munyon. How you doing? It is a great morning. It is on the cool side. I mean, we're going to get up to 70 today. It's going to be a blistering hot day here at the beach. I'll tell you what. Hi, Jim, Mark, and Cassie's tuning in this morning. I got to switch over to something on my computer so I can talk to you guys about something. And what I'm going to talk to you about is safety and how racing and safety has affected the cars you drive. Hey, Kenny, what are you up to these days? So let's see what we got here. All right. Jim's got that. Let's see. All right. Let's talk about safety and how racing has affected it. Hi, Peg. How you doing this morning? I'm at work. Uh-oh. My computer is coming on all of a sudden with sound. Okay, there we go. I've got that turned down. All right. Racing has had a big impact on the automobile industry and on safety itself. Now, although the rearview mirror was not designed in racing, it was adopted in racing by Ray Haroon at the first Indianapolis 500 in 1911, and that's when people took notice of it. The first use of a rearview mirror was a number of years before that, but it was one of those things where someone did it themselves and no one paid attention to it. Ray Haroon won the Indianapolis 500. And one of the things that may have helped him was the fact that he could see the competition behind him. He knew when to speed up, he knew when he could slow down, and he knew when to block the guy from passing him. So, that's what he's done. And Kenny Munyon's busy. Nice to talk to him, a past AAA rep that I worked with, and he was a insurance business manager at one point in time as well. Thank you for tuning in. All right, a lot of things have come from racing. Radial tires. Now, not many people think about radial tires as something that came from racing, but you got to remember racing, in Europe anyway, required tires that were a little bit different from what we're used to here because they didn't all race on tracks. World Rally Association, for example, it's off-road and part on-road. But radial tires came about early in the 40s. Maybe late in the 40s, but they came out. And the biggest manufacturer of radial tires that got noticed was Michelin. And I've had Michelin on cars, and I'll tell you what, they're great tires, but they make a difference. Not only do they have lower rolling resistance to give you better mileage, fuel mileage that is, and tire wear, but they do help with handling. With a regular bias ply tire, if you don't keep the tread on the track or on the ground, it will buckle over. It'll lean over. You'll lose contact patch. The radial tire allows the tread to stay in contact with the road. So that's something that came from racing as well. Now we see a lot of composite materials on race cars, carbon fiber and plastics of such, and you see that in passenger cars as well. Now the first use of a composite material was not in racing though. Henry Ford was a big proponent of soy product and made soy plastic components for his vehicles in the 40s and showed that they were very resilient and resistant to dents and dings. Now, it didn't come to use until later on, and the first use of a polymer or a plastic compound was probably the Corvette or the Kaiser Darren. Those were the first production vehicles to use fiberglass. Now, racers picked up on the fiberglass parts as light and weight. Carbon fiber has become extremely strong, and for example, Formula One cars, their tub or their composite bodies are made from carbon fiber. They're stronger and they're safer. So those are just three of the things that have come from racing, but there's other things as well. And let me get to those. Bear with me one moment. All right, we know race cars have roll cages. The first use of a safety structure within a vehicle, hidden within the body, is credited with Volvo. Mercedes picked up on it, BMW, and most of the Europeans. Now, the Americans tried with the airflow. The Chrysler Airflow had a full steel internal structure. In one of their commercials, they show a car going off a cliff, rolling down the cliff, starting up and driving away without very much damage to the cab area, protecting the driver. The safety has never been the utmost or prime importance in motor vehicle production and has been something that's been pushed. Seat belts, for an example, came directly out of racing. But when auto manufacturers tried to install seat belts in the 1950s, very few people would get them. They were an option. They weren't standard. Now, Volvo came out with a 3-point belt, and it's credited with saving a lot of lives back in the day, but you had to buy a Volvo to get it. Now, American cars went to it when it was mandated by the federal government. And starting in the early 1970s, you had a 3-point belt, but it buckled together. So you didn't have to use that third belt or the cross belt across your chest. And a lot of people complain, well, if I use that, I can't reach the dashboard. I can't reach the controls. It'll wrinkle my clothes. And for that reason, they weren't very widely used or mandated to be used. Now, since then, laws have come about where we now have to wear seatbelts. And I'll tell you what, from experience, I've always put seatbelts in my cars. As a matter of fact, got to order some today for a couple of our old cars because they don't have belts, and it's kind of uncomfortable driving without a seat belt. Now, I learned the hard way. I met a windshield head on, and when I was driving at great neck speed sometimes, I would slip and slide in the seats. Early cars did not have bolstered sides or something to hold you in place, so you had to use a seat belt, and that's primarily why I installed them. And Jerry Burwell, how are you doing? I haven't talked to you in a long time. Bruce Wiseman, how are you today? Jay Black is watching as well. Now, there's more that goes on to racing that had to do with cars. Safety beaded wheels. Now, you think about it for a second. Now, race cars run tubes in most cases. They don't run tubeless. But what holds the tire on the rim besides the pressure of the tube? Well, if you look at tire or wheels that have made since about 1956, 57, there's a little lip right behind the edge of the wheel. That helps hold the bead of the tire on the wheel. Now, I have a set of wheels that don't have that, and they're for a trailer I had that was built in the early 1950s. I took that to a tire place, and the guy looked at it and said, what's wrong? I said, well, it doesn't have the lip. We don't sell tubes for tires. I said, well, if it's a tubeless tire, it's not going to stay on. Low inflation, the tire will pop right off that. He didn't understand that. He also didn't understand DOT ratings on tires or the fact that DOT puts numbers on tires. He wasn't familiar with that. He said they've always had that. The tires that were on the wheels I brought him were so old they did not have DOT numbers on them. So they were possibly close to the original tires that came with that vehicle. And Skip Davis says, explains a lot. Yeah, head into the windshield. Yes, it does explain a lot. I was much younger. I got over it. Well, maybe I did. Let's see. ABS brakes. Now, most people say it's anti-lock brakes, but originally when it was brought out, they were advanced braking systems, and that was to help you maintain control. A lot of people have the misperception that ABS brakes will stop you quicker. No, they actually elongate stopping distance, but what they do allow is they allow you to have control of the vehicle, so you're not locking up the wheels skidding. When you skid, you don't have traction, and the inertia of the motion of the vehicle will carry it in the direction that it's pointed. With ABS, your front wheels will not lock up. You can steer in and out of trouble if you have the presence of mind to do so. However, the average American stabs the brakes, points and aims, and that's where a lot of accidents that could be avoided are not. Now, traction control, we know, is something that's used in race cars, but it has filtered its way down to production cars as well. And there are some cars that, frankly, I wouldn't drive without it. I've had traction control on 3 vehicles that I've had, and I've never really tested it to see how well it does, but a friend of mine decided to turn his traction control off on a late model GTO. He was pointed in the wrong direction after he started out from the corner, and then decided he'd better leave that traction control on. And that what it does is, in the case of Generous Motors cars, or that era, it is reverse ABS. And what it's doing is it's sensing for tire slip or spin, and it applies the brakes lightly to bring that tire back into control and keep you going straight. There's other various forms of traction control that are available. Yeah, Kenny, you're right. They were developed from airlines as well. Airlines picked it up on icy runways, and I also have an experience of that before that was used, and got to see the end of a runway in Anchorage, Alaska, sideways. All right, so what else do we got? We know about seatbelts. We know about monocoque chassis, or the composite chassis from the Formula One. And that basically, when you say a monocoque chassis, that is a chassis that is so structurally strong it doesn't need a separate frame. Chrysler was one of the first ones to produce cars with unit body construction, as we called it, because they didn't want to pay the royalty fees for monocoque, whoever developed that. And again, the Chrysler Airflow was the first vehicle to use a unit body construction. Now there's others, and Mercury and Chrysler and Ford Motor Company used it too, and it was not well received. Not that it was a problem as far as its reliability and structural integrity, but in the East Coast, for example, without the rust preventative that cars have today, they rusted away, sagged, and broke. Chrysler switched to unit body construction on all their vehicles beginning in 1962, when they also made the mistake of downsizing full-size cars to what later became mid-size cars. Now, suspension systems that we have today are far better than those of days gone by. One of the examples is we have a 1946 Ford. It's got a beam front axle. Very rough riding, although it keeps the tires directly in line with the ground, and it does prevent a little bit of body roll. It's not very compliant, and over a rough road, you will lose traction and potentially put yourself into a slide depending on how bad you're driving or how fast. Independent front suspension started coming about in the 30s. Ford was the last to change to front suspensions with independent action, and only on the front, and that was with the 1949 Ford. Now, Plymouth, Chevrolet, most of General Motors products had optional independent suspensions. Even Plymouth had independent suspension back in the mid-30s. But Ford held on to the beam axle. And if you look at that, 1948 was the last year of the beam front axle for Fords. Strangely enough, when the National Street Rod Association began, that was their cutoff date for what they called a street rod, 1948. Coinkydink? I don't think so. So let's look at some other things here. And I love pop-up ads. They show up all the time here. And they block you from using your computer. Aerodynamics is something we're seeing more and more in cars today. The reason is not for higher speeds, it's for better fuel economy. Although hot rodders noticed aerodynamics early on, especially the ones that were racing at Bonneville and El Mirage, going for land speed records. Aerodynamics made a big difference. Now, one of the things I noticed back in the 1970s was there were a number of cars that, because of poor aerodynamics or lacking aerodynamics, cars would become hazardous. And one of those cars was the famed 240Z. Now, it had a great fastback design and almost a wedge-type shape, but it also had an angle in the nose that allowed air to get underneath it, and at higher speeds would lift the vehicle or take weight off the front wheel, the front end of the vehicle. That was quickly fixed with what they called as a spook or a front spoiler. You see that in racing now with splitters and so forth to keep the front end down. If you look at many production cars today, they have a flap or something coming out the bottom in the front. Not only does that help fuel mileage, it also helps stability, and it also directs air into the cooling system for better cooling of the car. So these are just some of the things that have come from racing that have worked their way into your passenger car to make them safer and more efficient. Hi, I'm Hot Rod Bob, and you've got Gas, the morning edition. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll be back tomorrow at 11 a.m., and from time to time we'll do some special few-minute Facebook Lives, as you saw yesterday when Devin was here doing his illustration of our 56 wagon. All right, so this is Hot Rod Bob again. Like me on Facebook. Share this if you liked it. Tell your friends about it. And also like GAAS, the Great American Auto Scene. Now, we'll be back in studio in September because in August, we'll be covering the land speed record races, the Bonneville time trials, right from the Salt in Bonneville. So in August, I'll be live on the Salt. You'll get your morning gas with a little extra salt. We'll talk to you guys later. See you tomorrow, as a matter of fact, 11 a.m. right here. Take care now. Have a great day.